a little slower, so it's like. There is a beauty from the origins of fashion garment making. A big part of the work that I do now is to honor where our industry came from and the needle trade and revitalizing that view of it. Hi, my name is Stacy Stube. I am an Indonesian American fashion designer based here in Baltimore. My brand that we have here is called Elsa Fitzgerald. It's been inspired by my work in Bali, Indonesia, where I lived for 3 years. This is called a kebaya. This is what the women wear to a wedding or special occasions. First done in the lace, and then they hand beat all of this detail here. And then I spent, before that, 7 years in London, so very much inspired by European design and vintage garments. While I was living in London, I actually worked for McQueen when he was alive in the press office. And I remember I had a job to archive the garments and take them down to a special storage area they had. But I already knew I wanted to work for him just because of his approach to fashion and this sort of renegade conversation about things he cares about through art. Even some of the little details, like on the sleeve here, that's very like 1920s. So come on, let's have a look at the rest of the place. This is where the beading happens. Hello! See where the things are all made? Huh? Mommy. She's such a shy. See that one? We have a sewing area. Hello, Heidi. So they had different color thread spools. All just so vibrant. I don't actually pick much thread here, but I do get to pick out the beads.
Coba ke sini.
Yeah! So these are all the different sequences. If I'm working on the dress, I might want to just pick a new color. And then you can see these are the cards that they use for the patterns. And that's what they'll lay. Then follow me. We're going to go to the fabric storage room. Hello. And so when I returned to Baltimore after 10 years away from the United States, I was connected to Sally DeMarco because I was told that, you know, Baltimore used to have a garment industry, and through my youth I never saw it. There wasn't any factories, there weren't, you know, fabric suppliers around like you see in New York.
I grew up in a family of that worked in the needle trades. I came from Europe, from Italy, and my mother and her sisters had a fashion design school in Italy, but then we migrated actually to the United States because of the garment industry. The garment industry was booming, and it was 1958 when we landed in America, and so it was sort of natural that I go into the industry, but the industry at that time was different than what it is now. Every factory had a design room with a designer, and so designing was done all in-house. We actually did the sketches, the patterns, whether it would be through flat pattern or draping the patterns on a dress form. We fitted the garments on dress forms or models. All of that was done right in the factory, whereas today, I don't know, there's probably a handful of factories left that produce that way. Everything is through spec sheets, and they sketch their designs. The design could be done in another part of the United States and then shipped into cut, and the garments are cut and done in the factory. So that's really all changed. If there was a problem in the factory, I would be called to go into the factory to see what the problem was. The buttonholes aren't acting right or whatever. And there was a lot of handwork. We did buttonholes by hand, and that was all replaced when the buttonhole machines came into were invented, and people lost their jobs. So they were either trained to use the machine buttonhole, or that was it. They just were out of work. So I didn't even know what the term needle trade was until I started researching. So that's why I moved to London. That's why I went to Indonesia. So then Sally connected me to Phil Spector, and I interviewed, and funny enough, it was just behind my childhood home. So the factory went around the world and ended up in literally my backyard.
We do tours with the Baltimore Heritage Society because there's this fascination that they can't believe that we exist.
What the color is, what the material, where it's coming from. It was like a door opened into a world that I never knew existed, in the sense of I went and was in the fashion industry, but on the retail side, on the management side, on the strategy side, and then to kind of how do we expand, how do we grow. But I never saw the other side where an industry was being lost onshore. Because, the only time I noticed labels was when we had our luxury clients shopping at Burberry looking for Made in England. And so that's when it started to click to me that people care about where things are made and they associate a level of craftsmanship and prestige. And I didn't see Baltimore as a city of luxury and prestige because all that had faded.
So when I first went to the factory, the floor kind of shakes a little, and I love it. It's like six-ish in the morning, and that means industry is alive.
A lot of the things changed, so the industry has evolved so much. It was more centralized then. Everything was done on the premises. Here, nowadays, it's more decentralized. You can have designers working in Asia and the garments produced in another part of the world, or vice versa. The designers are working here in America, but everything is done through spec sheets, and it's what sells. It's going to be reproduced and maybe changed a little, whereas in the old days we had to come up with a different line for the different seasons, and it was usually 2 lines. It was fall and winter and spring and summer, and that was it. Some companies did resort and everything else. Now you find companies doing so many lines throughout the year. So those are some of the things that have changed about the industry. Now we have product developers in the industry. We don't really have fashion designers like we did. In the old days, there were pattern makers and all of that. Now you've got computer-aided pattern designs. Somebody has to input the specs into the machine, but it's a lot easier. You don't have to have a pattern maker who's doing patterns by hand on the premise. Garments are often cut by hand with these scissors, these big scissors here, or given shape. But now, then eventually the cutting machine came into existence, so that changed some of that. So hand shapers weren't really needed. So a lot of things have evolved. The sewing machine still sews the way it was, but now they're computerized. But the mechanism is, the basic foundation is still there.
Well, there's a lot of concerns that not only I have, but the industry has about the way we operate. And it's almost like we've gone so far in the wrong direction that do we turn back? And how do we turn back? How do we kind of clean up the mess that we've made? I mean, if we can compare the fashion industry as to how we pollute the world, how do you clean up that mess? Because we've already created systems and the way we package things and the way we do things. So how, as an entrepreneur with limited resources, even begin that conversation? Some people say, just don't produce anymore. Only use vintage garments or secondhand. We already have enough. But at the same time, my concern is to kind of link the Elsa Fitzgerald brand with 2 elements. Number 1 is to preserve and utilize these handcraft skills, not just the artisan side, but also the art of making, tailoring, fine needlework. And the only way you can keep those alive is by using them, using your hands. So you have to design to make. The other side is the job opportunity. If we create the factory of the future as defined by many companies at the moment, it's about efficiency, it's about pumping out product. But is that the solution? Because how many jobs are created from the automation of industry? A lot less. So the way that our industry was built up, the Baltimore garment industry, was about creating jobs for people that were needing opportunity, and mainly the immigrant population who was coming from Ireland, from Italy, from different countries with these skill sets, and they couldn't speak the language, but they were able to bring up economic progress through their families, through investing in their children.
The scary thing is I've been there about 3 years, and in that time, 2 of what I consider industry legends have passed away suddenly. Those skills are not transferred on. There is no progression plan.
Well, for a long time, sustainability was related to the materials that we use and the impact that we have on the environment.
At the factory, we were invited to Washington to represent U.S. manufacturing and with the undersecretary to talk about the needs. And I kind of sat in the back because I wasn't, the president of the company, and there was a panel of 7 of them all men. And the discussion was about how do we mechanize, how do we compete, how do we drop the total landed cost of goods. That means once it arrives here in the United States, how cheaply can we do it? And so they kept going on and saying, we need new machines, we need this and that. And it wasn't until the end that the undersecretary asked me, what about you? What about you as a young person? And I said that I care about industry, I care about the people, I care about the jobs that we're creating. So to mechanize it is to take away our humanity of industry. And that I didn't say it then, of course, out of respect, but that I don't want to be part of.
But during my time in Indonesia, I was really inspired by the artisans and the craftsmanship and the heritage.
We've lost the reason why I think it matters. And so I spent 5 years here back in the U.S. Hosting workshops, talking about this discussion about a Baltimore fashion renaissance. I don't know what that looks like. Every time they have departments that are dedicated just to production. And so that was our discussion with artists, with entrepreneurs, with fashion designers. And what I've started to see through this time is that it's not the large volume of sewers.
My brand has to be a part of the making culture. It has to, but the challenges are minimum wage is rising.
The United States, according to the employment the Bureau of Labor, there's only 47,000 sewing machine operators across the entire United States. I don't know statistically, but I would assume that one state could have covered that amount. And so what we're seeing as well is they're going back to that handover. There's no handover. And the wage is actually lowering in the United States despite the minimum wage rising. So what that means is they're getting squeezed all the time, even at that price point. So who's going to want to work in industry? And so the management level, I believe the average wage for a management level person in industry at a factory is $22 an hour. How in the world do you have an education and a student loan and then care enough for industry to create a factory? So that's where we've completely shot ourselves in the foot. So the next thing is who's responsible? The person who pays the bill, who buys the garment, who's accepting that $5 t-shirt and telling their girlfriend, oh my God, I got this for $5. I can do the math, you could do the math, but that slave labor wage is there. And so we're excited that we're consuming so much. And then the last place I bought a vintage garment before going back to Indonesia from Du Bois, across from Montgomery Ward. And it was used to be a textile place, and then they went into vintage garments, and then that turned into a storage unit. We have more storage unit systems being expanded in the United States than we have manufacturers. So then I had to really kind of take a step back and think about, outside of the factory, all those lives, all those jobs, all those workers, who has a voice for them? And when people come to the factory, they're always asking, well, why don't you have Americans working there? Because we exported our skill.
I would like to keep preserving the quality type of sewing and pattern making and fitting that I was fortunate enough to have mastered, and my family, my teachers, everyone passed it on to me when I worked in the industry, and so I like to pass it on to the others. Our hearts are both in the same place. Both of us want to keep the industry alive, and it's up to you to take it forward now, because
no pressure.
You're a lot younger. Let's face it. But through Sew Bromo and through short courses, I think we can keep the quality, that quality of beautifully constructed clothing that fit well, and that you utilize gorgeous fabrics. I think we can do that through short courses. Schools are not doing it. They don't have the time to do it. I don't know, from what I've seen is they don't have the passion in doing that, and the industry is going in the fast fashion track. So it's up to those of us and to just do some workshops so we can show those that are interested how to learn these various crafts.
So that fine needlework, that level of sewing that you no longer see in your garments, perhaps you don't want to pay the price to buy it, but maybe you'll pay the price to learn to make it.
Now I see Elsa Fitzgerald has to be strong enough, not by volume, but by digital entertainment.
This is Stacy from Elsa Fitzgerald, and we are here at Madison House, and I am sewing on site. I am working on a collection for Sustainable Fashion Week, and I thought to bring you in on the journey so you could see the house and this beautiful space.
The work that I'm creating here is inspired by an Indonesian garment called the kebaya. So this is what the process has become. It's become a connection to my Indonesian heritage, a sustainability of hand to heart and making.
I pin them to the dress form, sort of what I call painting with lace. I usually have maybe some reference images, not that the design is coming from there, but just the color and the sort of feeling of it. So this is the Charles Worth books.
I hope that the perception of what fashion has been and can become can be something that we all admire. Beyond the pages of a magazine, beyond the eyes of a beautiful woman. And we are the creators of our own imagination, and I hope we never lose that whimsical aspect of who we are. And fashion just happens to be my medium.